Okay, so you and your brother just finished watching a Van Damme movie. So you decide, yeah, let's go downstairs, we'll start wrestling around and sparring. Well, one guy gets hit in the face by accident. The other brother's mad. He goes to the wall, blows a hole into it. Oh boy, now what? We gotta fix this hole in the wall before mom and dad see it. I'll show you 3 different ways to do it, and that way you have different options and you know what to do. Okay, so I've set out the tools that I need now to do these 3 holes. You'll need a drill with the Phillips bit, some drywall screws, a drywall saw. On the one scenario, maybe some chunks of 2x4 or plywood. Need a level, tape measure, Olfa knife, pencil. So with the top hole here, we'll show you how to do that when we go to tape. This one, what we'll do is we're just gonna, since it's pretty battered up, we're just gonna cut a square hole. And we're not even gonna try to hit studs or anything. We're just gonna basically make a random sized hole. But we'll use a level so we know that when we cut our drywall, it can be square and it's simple. A jaggedy hole is harder to cut a patch, so if you do a nice square one, you can just easily measure it, cut it. Actually, it doesn't even need to be that wide. Okay, so with that, just take your drywall saw. You can do it with an Olfa knife too, it's just harder. Make sure there's no electrical or anything that you might cut through. Must have been training for the UFC on that drywall. Okay, so we'll just... Alright, so that is a random size hole. Now comes to play just a couple, like anything will work. Anything that's wood, that's flat, 2x4, 1x4 plywood. Just cut them a little bit longer so you can screw into it all. Yeah, so just throw those in. You want half on your existing drywall and half where your new piece is going to go. Okay, so you just throw your drywall screws in. Make sure they sink just below the surface, but not too deep or they don't hold properly. I'll go through how to do this one. Now, if you want to hit the studs and you don't want to just put in random pieces, what you do is, I guess probably with it being that battered, I could probably just cut a little bit off on either side, just roughly, just so that I can throw my tape measure in behind and find out the measurement to the next stud. So this one is 4 1/4. Now most studs are 1.5 inches wide, so you want to land up half on that, so that's 3/4 of an inch. So if at 4 1/4 I have to add 3/4 of an inch, so that's 5 inches. So over 5 inches will land me center of a stud. Same thing over here. Well, that's 4 3/8. Add 3/4, that's 5 1/8. So 5 1/8. So now I'll do plumb marks there. That'll find the center of the studs. You can just, once those are marked out, use your Olfa knife, just cut through a bunch of times till you hit the stud, and then drywall saw horizontally. So just go like that. Okay, so I can make a decent sized patch. Doesn't really matter the size of it. By the time it's all mudded, this is going to be just a giant amount of mud on there, so it doesn't matter like this size or this size of a patch. Doesn't really make much difference. It still all gets mudded and primed and repainted anyway. Once you've made your cuts, it should look something like this. Nice and square. You know you're halfway in the stud, so you have backing to screw to. Now at this point, which is nice, is you can cut your holes, determine the thickness of the drywall you need. Now you're going to probably have to go to the store, get some supplies. Now while you're there, get the thickness of the drywall. So standard's 1/2 inch, and I hope that it's a standard setup for you. Then while you're there, you're going to want to get some all-purpose drywall mud. Do that. Don't get any spackling compound or anything weird, just get drywall mud. You're going to probably want to do it on a budget, but you are going to need a few things. You don't necessarily need a tray, because you can probably just scoop it out of the bucket. But get yourself a 4-inch putty knife. You're going to need some tape to do the patch to cover up the joints. You don't necessarily need a rasp. A rasp is just good for straightening the edges and making them nice and smooth. I don't think you'd need one of those. You can get one if you want. And then I'd highly recommend at least for surely getting a 12-inch drywall trowel. They're better than the knives because they're not so flexible. They're more rigid, and they'll keep your project straight, and you'll be able to feather it out easier, and that way you won't actually ever see the patch down the road. And then you can get a hawk if you want. Like, it's just nice, you can pile your mud on there, use your trowel, apply your mud. We'll get to that when we need to. But now what I did is I took some 1/2-inch drywall, I measured my openings, and I just took off 1/8 just to make sure that they fit. I don't want to have to like tweak it. Doesn't have to fit perfectly tight either. It can have a little gap. You're going to mud it and tape it anyway. But what I'm going to do is, since this paper's all kind of flared out everywhere, I can't just put mud over that or tape, because it's just built out just that little bit. So what I want to do is just take the hole, clean it up with my knife, just kind of shave off these little hairs, paper hairs that are sticking out. Get rid of those. So do that wherever you need to. That'll save you a lot of headache. Simple step. So do that before you put your drywall on. What I like to do is just make sure that I always just screw the existing side of the drywall and the new one, right? There's no use not screwing it into the existing part. So with that, we'll just clean up these holes, we'll get the drywall installed, then we're ready to put some tape on. So now you got your drywall into place, now you're ready to install your taping and do your mudding. Now, if you're buying the pre-mixed drywall mud, the multi-purpose stuff, that way it's good for applying the tapes, filling and sanding out. It's easy to sand. Now, just make sure you mix it down with water. If you use it right out of the pail, it's too thick. Your tapes will go on too thick. It takes too much effort to put on and won't turn out right. So just mix it down with some water. You'll want it to a consistency, I don't know, just you want it so that it'll stick, but it's also a little bit fluid and runny, kind of like that. It's usually just so thick right out of the can. It's almost like pudding right now. So with that, I'm just going to show you how to apply the tapes on these two holes. The bottom one, it's all the same stuff, just a little bit different size. Now, to start, I guess what we'll do is we'll start with this little one. Now, we're not going to really do anything to it. I'm just going to remove some of the loose paper, because you can't really bond tape to loose paper. So we're just going to get rid of that. It's okay if that's a little bit messed up on the inside. Now this is an easy way to do a hole about this size. If you probably do a little bit bigger, but not a whole lot, the way we're going to repair this. If it's much bigger than that, just do something like this. But I'll show you how I've done these in the past. Is I'll cut a few pieces of tape. a little bit bigger in the hole, and I'll probably need 2 of them. Just bend the tape. Now what I'm going to do is, because you need something in behind here, I've seen some people in the past throw like a piece of newspaper or something just to help keep the drywall mud from falling in behind. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the back side of the tape, I'm going to load it up with mud. Now you can do that basically just where the hole is if you want, kind of like so. That way when the mud dries, the tape is solid, kind of like drywall basically. What I'm going to do is I'll just apply it to the tape, little ball that'll fit inside the hole, but I also need to apply mud to the actual drywall, because that's what's going to glue this tape to the wall, and then it'll also keeps it from cracking down the road, because you can't just mud over something or it'll just crack and fall out. So that's what the tape's for. The mud's the glue and the filler and everything else. So that should be good. So I'm just going to put this halfway over the hole, and then I'm just going to wipe the excess off. Now you don't want to wipe too hard. If you squish all the mud out, it won't bond, so you just need a thin little layer. But if you're too thick, it's hard to blend out. So just wipe this off. And that's why it's nice to have mud that's fairly fluid, because then it'll squish out. Doesn't take a whole bunch of pushing. Okay, so that's good there. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to overlap these tapes. I'm actually going to push this in a little bit. I just want it dented in because I don't want it to be an outie, or it's going to be really hard to fix. Do the same thing, apply a little bit of mud to the back side of the tape. Apply that on evenly. Now, if you look closely right here, you can actually see through the mud and to the paint. That's too thin there. You want to be able to just have a nice thin coat, but you don't want to be able to see through it. Now that hole there is not going to matter because I have mud on my tape. So I want to just overlap that, squish it in. I'll just wipe out the excess for now. Not too hard yet. Now what I'm going to do is I'll just push all this in, kind of make a hole. Even you can just fill it with a little bit of mud as well, because then the mud will dry and make that paper stiff or keep it from flopping around. Now I'll just finish wiping it off. That way I don't have any drywall protruding. Everything's flat and flush. This little corner's lifting a bit, so just put a little mud under there. Now that, you just want to let that set for probably at least 24 hours. Now that I've cut off those paper that was sticking out, I still want to take the back side of my knife and just dent these edges in, so I'll just do that. Don't want anything sticking out. Okay, and sometimes it'll flare out when you put your screws in close to the edge. So this will just push those in, and then we're going to apply our tape. Now, what we'll do is I'll probably just go longer on the left and right side, and then I'll just fill in little short pieces that way. Do it however you want. So like I said, just apply your mud, make sure it's even, but also make sure you can't see through it. Then what I like to do is just cut the length beside it so I don't make a mess in the mud. So cut 2 of those. Just a little bit longer. Then there's a seam down the middle where it folds. You want to just basically put that right over the joint so it's centered. Put that on, wipe out the excess. Now sometimes with gaps like this, I like to do the same as just kind of dent it in a little bit, then finish wiping it clean. So that should be good. You may not be able to see it, but this is almost bubbling out, or it's kind of flush. It's just looking a little bit funny, but what'll happen is as the mud dries, it shrinks and it'll just pull that inward into the gap a little bit. So don't worry too much, just be aware of it. So we'll do both of these sides. Yeah, so I'll dent it in before I finish it off. Okay, and then now, so I'll just get 2 lengths. I can be a little bit shorter. If you overlap it, then you just have that much thicker material to try to hide. So I don't like to overlap it, but I like to get it really close so it doesn't crack. So I'll cut 2 of those. That's about good. I'm putting it on a little thick. If you want to be you put it on a little thinner than that, but I know I'm just going to squish it out. Kind of dent that in. And try to be careful not to lift the previous tape off. These little pieces are hard because they just shift around so much, but that in. It doesn't have to look perfect because it's going to have probably 3 coats over it anyway, as long as there's no chunks or anything on there. So now those will just dry and then we'll show you how to coat it. I like using the tape. You can use the mesh, the self-sticking mesh. That prevents the cracks, and then you have to coat over it. Just be aware that sometimes hard to hide that mesh. You need your mud just thick enough so that when you sand it, you don't see that. Because if you see the mesh after you're done sanding, you'll see it through the paint as well. So now that the tapes are all dry, we're ready to trowel on our mud. Now, like I said before, really the only tool you'll use from now on, or the one you'll need, is just a 12-inch trowel and a hawk. Now the hawk is nice just because you can't actually fit this big of a trowel into like a little mud tray. And then I just take my drywall or my 4-inch putty knife, load the hawk up, then I'm ready to go. And I'll say it again anyway, is that this is straight and it's a solid piece, it's not flexible. That'll keep all of our mudding flat. If you use like a 12-inch knife, it's like a giant putty knife, there's too much wave, you can't get it straight. And the method that I'll show you, it's too hard to do with a 12-inch knife. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my 4-inch knife, make sure not to peel back any tape, but I'm just going to scratch off any chunks of mud. Might as well do that to both, and then I'll show you the method. Now this one, it's still dented in, but I can feel that it's solid. It's not just floppy paper, because that'll never hold up. You'll always see it, right? So it's solid, which is good. Plus it'll get filled a bit more, and when that's dry, it'll just help solidify that. So with these kind of patches, it's basically just a whole series of butt joints. So I have other videos on butt joints if you want to review it, and if I missed anything on this, you can review those videos and just kind of catch the in-betweens. But what we'll do is we'll just do 1 coat vertically, we'll do 1 coat horizontally, opposite, opposite. So it'll probably be 4 coats by the time we're done. So with that, we're just gonna load up our trowel. It takes a little bit of work just to get the hang of it, but you know, 10 or 15 minutes, you will be good at it. Make sure mud's not too liquidy. Like it should be able to just stick to the hawk. If it's too runny, it's really hard to use this. And there'll be bloopers and you'll see me make mistakes in other videos as well, and who knows, I might make one today. But you know, it's kind of like thick pudding. And just gonna go vertically today. I'm gonna do three swipes. I'm gonna start about here, because when I go this way, the patch is gonna be huge. So I don't have to start right here. I want to kind of start a couple inches below and end a couple inches above. Now if you've missed anything when you did your taping, you'll notice it when the tapes get wet from moist mud. And you'll see if you have blisters in behind there, and they're just like little air pockets behind the tape. And as long as there's not a lot, you can just cut the little pieces out and then just fill it with mud anyway. So that's just a pointer for you. So I'm going to apply this, just putting a little more weight on the left side. And basically I'm just getting the mud on there right now. So same with this, I'm going to just push a little more on the right. Now I'm kind of shy there, so I'm just going to go evenly over the whole thing, pick up a little more mud, put some more on. Go like that. Okay, now we're ready to start and actually get it flat. Now, what I try to do, and my theory is always it's better to do more coats than to load it up thick and try to sand it off later. That's just a bad idea. It makes a mess and it's hard to sand. So what you want to do is you want to cover your tapes, but if you're a beginner, then what you want to do is just wipe it off. Make sure that you can see the tape. So I'll show you exactly what I mean. Just going to do one swipe down the middle. Just going to load up some mud evenly. I can see there's a hollow spot already. Okay, so I can still tell it's pretty thick. It's got air bubbles and it's not very even. So I'll just hit this again. Now it's probably good for now, because I still have to hit the left and right side, and I know that that's going to wipe even more off. So just more weight on the left side. You want to cut this right down to drywall or paint. You don't want to leave too much of an edge, or you got to feather it out that much more. See, and I'm just going to hit that one more time. Alright, so that's good there. You can see where this line is, just the difference from this going flat and then from flat down to tapered to nothing. But I'm just going to put a little more even pressure on it. Try to get rid of my wavy arm here. So that's good. I can just barely see the tapes, which is good. I know that I'm not too thick. I want to just hit this one more time in the middle, because I want the middle nice and flat, and then either side just tapers down to the drywall. Just light and even, and you can tell the mud evens right out. So that's it. It doesn't have to look perfect. As long as you're on all four perimeter sides, starting from zero, everything's filled, yeah, and you just don't want any thick around the edge. So that looks good there. I can see the tape. I know that I'm not too thick, but it's thick enough where I don't need to do like 5 more coats, right? If I wipe it off too much, then it just is more coats. Now, which is fine. It's better to do more than to sand, like I said. The theory behind the first coat is to get it thick enough where most of your drying time has taken place. So it's thick, you kind of get the shape of what you want. Your second coat will add a little bit of shape, help straighten it out, but it's still filling a fair bit. And then your third and fourth coats are basically just skimming the imperfections. So just keep that in mind. And we'll do this top one now. Get the mud on there. And then just once in the middle, just to take care, make sure it's nice and flat. Okay, I'm happy there. I can see the tape just a little bit. I'm thick enough. There's some air bubbles and stuff. I'm not worrying about that. It's not going to be perfect. That's why you do more coats later. So our first coat is dry. Now that coat usually takes the most amount of time to dry because it's so thick. And so hopefully, if you smashed your walls and your parents are away and you're trying to get it fixed, hopefully they're gone for a couple days at least. But we'll show you now that our drying times will be a lot quicker, so we should be able to do 2 coats today. Now, I'm just going to scratch off any of the high points or any drywall that's sticking out. Okay, you can see where the tapes are dimpled down in the centers. So that's good because the mud shrunk down and it still needs some more coats, but I know I'm not too thick. Even right here you can see where the tape is and where I dented it in, so that's shrunk down and still needs some more filling. And when I feel it, I can feel it this way and it feels, you know, pretty flat, but this way I can tell where the tapes start, and even this way I can feel, because when your trowel comes off it kind of falls off of the tapes, so there's dented in top and bottom. But let's just coat these sideways and see what happens. I mixed my mud a little bit thinner today. Just it gives a little smoother finish and easier to apply. I'm going to try to keep these separated just for the sake of the video. And just another idea is if this is an inside angle, which it would be in real life, it wouldn't just be a random wall like this. You know, you just ride the corner of your trowel in the inside of the angle or the inside of the corner. And sometimes what you want to do is just get the mud in there like that. You know, that kind of idea. Then you have lots of mud in the angle, and then you can just follow that trowel like that, fill it up. That actually looks pretty good. Just going to hit this one more time. I can tell there's lots of air bubbles, so I know it's a bit thick. And I'm just going to, a little more weight down on the bottom here. I cut that down so that's blending right into the wall. Now there's a little bit of a hump in the middle. I can just see a little ridge, so I'm just going to go really lightly across the center to flatten this out. Perfect. Okay, and I'll do the same here. Yeah, it's working out where I don't have to blend them, so that's good. Yeah, you can tell, I don't know if you can tell in the video, but you can see lots of air bubbles, and I could tell even just by the sound that it's really thick there. You know it's way too thick. And I always stress that it's better to put more coats on that are thin than cake it on like this and try to get it straight or try to sand it. So once down the middle, picked up some fuzz. Just gonna do this again, cake it on a little bit, and you can see when I'm applying the mud I'll start more perpendicular, and as I need to apply more mud I just keep flattening it out, and it does a good job. So just keep that in mind. So more weight on the top there to cut it to the wall, more weight on the bottom here, and then I'm just going to try to get it flat in the middle. Okay, so that's it for today. You can accelerate the drying by heating the place up and getting a fan on it. So that'll save you some time as well. It's been about 10 minutes and I had the fan on here lightly just to get it accelerated a bit and start drying, and I wanted to demonstrate what it looks like as it's drying so you know what it's supposed to look like. Now with this one, it's going white, and I'll zoom in after. I'm by myself today, cameraman's off. It's starting to dry right here where the tapes are, so I know that I've skimmed it down and just added a thin layer. Same here. And then it's filled right here and down here where it's still wet, which is what we wanted to do. And same here. It's wet right in that center where it was dented in. Now it's fairly thick up there because in theory we went to the inside corner of the existing drywall mud, and so that is just straight. It's not tapered back at the top, so that's why that's thicker there, and it's thicker down at the bottom, which is perfect. And then it's already dry around the edges, so we know we've cut it right down to the wall. And I'll just take a moment to zoom in. You can take a look. It's actually dry. The center one's dry on the top on the left and right where the tapes end. You can see where it's dry there already. And then you can see where it's still wet, where it's starting to dry already on the top there. So gives you a good example. So that second coat didn't take very long to dry. It's been a few hours that helped with having a fan run on it. Now what you want to do is obviously third coat. Now this is a time where instead of scratching off any high spots, you might want to just hit it lightly with the sander. I just like to use a sanding sponge, a fine grit one, and I like to feel for any high spots. And this middle's a little bit. And really, you don't want to sand too much. You don't want to hit the paper of the tape. But just take off any high spots, any edges. Over there, I'll take that down to nothing. Get rid of any ridges or anything that's there. Because now you're getting into skim coating, and it's just basically fine tuning it all. So I'm going to get rid of that. There's a little bit of an edge there, so just kind of sanded that down. Same there. Okay, so with your skim coats, you want to thin the mud down, because now that I've sanded it, that dust is on there. It'll dry your mud out really, really quick. Now I'll just go the opposite way. So I'll go up and down now. I'll maybe go a little bit wider. So like anything, just get it on there. So now I'm just fine tuning it. I'm basically applying the mud, wiping it back off, filling any low spots. And it starts getting really smooth with that mud nice and thinned out, and you get a really nice smooth finish. Now I don't know if you can see. Well, I have a few hitchhikers here, and that's why I'm wiping my trowel off all the time, and I would even wipe off that back edge and make sure that the very edge of this trowel is nice and clean. Especially, it's most important for skim coating. I have a little ridge here that I want to try to flatten out. A few hitchhikers are okay because you can always just touch those up later. There's a really good chance that after this is dry, if I sanded it out, it'd be perfectly paint ready. But I'm just going to skim it out a fourth time just to show you and just to make sure that it's nice and flat and that you won't see the patchwork that we've done. It's been about 20 minutes. This third coat is drying quite evenly. There's a few low spots that it's filled. It's kind of hard to tell. This one you can see it's dry here and it's dry there. So we've kind of filled the middle, which makes sense, right? Because that'd been a low spot because the tapes would have been around. This would have been a tape and here as well. Now it's filled this low spot as it starts to taper off, which is great. Yeah, and right here as well, still a little bit wet. Here, it's dry just here a little bit, and I'll maybe have to zoom in for you, but you can see the very center is quite wet still, maybe not quite wet, but there's a little ring where it's dry, so it's just filled that little dip and then it's filled back around it and just basically evened out. Okay, so same thing here. We'll give it just a light sand, get rid of any edges or any high spots, then we're ready for the fourth coat. Now we'll just go the opposite direction. Just a little bit wider than before. Okay, that should be good. Probably could have thinned my mud out a little more, but it's not a big deal. It's definitely easier on smaller patches like this. See how sometimes if I need it on the top, I'll just load the top of the trowel up and then apply it that way. Same thing with the bottom. I need a little more on the bottom, I'll just load it up there. Now it's on there, I can just take it back off more or less. Sometimes it's good just to clean that edge off. No hitchhikers. Okay, so let's let that dry. We'll come back to it in 15 and show you what it looks like. Okay, so let's just go over this quick. You can see where it's starting to dry. Mostly starting to dry in the centers, which is typical. It's just lightly skimmed and filled the outers. You know, since we went this way, it's filled this dip, and same here. It's dry right in there. So now it's ready for sanding. We'll just wait. We'll do that tomorrow, but you know, we were able to do second, third, fourth coat all in one day just with the help of a fan. So that's a good pointer for that. And yeah, we'll just show you how to sand this out and we're ready to rock. If you use a sanding sponge, if you get a brand new one, I suggest taking it to a piece of plywood or something and just dulling it out, especially these corners. They'll leave sanding scratches pretty deep. And get one that's just a fine grit. But this one's worn out, which is nice. And the theory behind sanding is you want to get rid of any edges. So even this fine edge, you'll see that in your paint job. Any lines, like you can't probably tell, but there's just little faint lines from just the trowel. You'll see those through the paint. So anything you can see with your eye, sanding scratches, lines, and these edges, have to get rid of them. You don't want to see anything. So, and always wear a mask. Stuff's bad for you. So we'll just go ahead and sand this out. It's pretty straightforward, but you know, you want to feel everything as well and make sure there's no high spots. This one's leaving sanding scratches. I don't know why. There we go. And if you have any faint, just little fine scratches, you can just sand them out and then just continually go bigger with your circles and just even it out. And only if they're really fine. Okay, so that one's good, and it feels like I can't feel any humps or bumps. So when that's painted, you won't be able to tell. If you can't feel it, you definitely won't see it. But even that, you still might see that line. It's got to be blended right in. And if you use a treble light, it's always nice if you shoot it from the side. It shines shadows and that on the wall, and you can see any fine scratches or imperfections. Okay. You notice how we only made one mess right at the end, and that was just the sanding we did right now. If you do thin coats, minimal sanding in between until this stage, then you only have one major cleanup to do. Sometimes I'll run a shop vac underneath where I'm sanding and it'll suck most of the dust in. It won't go all over the house. Now you're ready. You have to prime any patches that you've done. So prime that with a primer sealer and then paint your wall. And that's it for now. If you need any other tips, there's going to be other ones on the website as well. And thanks for following.